Has anyone ever accused you of being too emotional just to dismiss your pain?
I am going to start this the way I wish someone had started with me years ago, with the plainest version of the truth that still lands like a punch to the ribs, because once you hear it, you cannot unhear it, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and it is this. Every Christmas, my family sends out a glossy card with a smiling group photo and a tidy little caption about blessings and gratitude and community, and I am never in it, not because I live on the other side of the world or because I refuse to show up, but because they never ask, they never tell me when the photo is happening. And when I bring it up, they smooth it over with those practice lines about timing and logistics that sound reasonable if you do not know the history and sound cruel if you do. You would think I would be used to it by now, because this has been going on since my early 20s when I moved out for work and they decided, politely and permanently, that my schedule was always the inflexible one, that my life was always the outlier, that I was always the person who would understand, and the first year I swallowed it because the caption said something like, "the whole crew together at last," and I told myself it was a one-off mistake. Then the second year I called my mom and she said they took the photo after church and assumed I was busy, and by the third year I started to see the pattern, and I stopped putting the card on my fridge because it felt like pinning up evidence that I was optional in my own family. This year, if you can believe it, they did not even pretend to try, because I did not hear about the photo from a text or a call or even a half-hearted invitation thrown out at the last minute to cover themselves. I found out because my cousin posted a behind-the-scenes shot on social media with the caption, "Take number 5, and there they were, my parents and my brother and his wife and their 2 kids plus my sister and her new fiancé, lined up like a catalog of belonging." And it was a Saturday afternoon and my phone buzzed 3 times with people tagging me, and I just sat there looking at it the way you look at a bill you already know you cannot pay, because the point was not whether I could have made it if I had known. The point was that they made a plan that did not include me and felt fine about broadcasting it to the whole town. I called my mom anyway, because I am stubborn about giving people chances to tell the truth even after they have shown me who they are, and she answered with that bright voice she saves for public moments and said they were just wrapping up a quick little thing at the church hall. Nothing formal. Everyone happened to be there, and I asked her if anyone happened to think to invite me, and she took that careful pause that always means she is choosing a story, and she said they were told by the photographer that it had to be done fast, and they knew I was busy with my job, and it would have been a lot of back and forth, and she finished with the line she has used on me since high school, "Please do not make this a big deal, it is just a card." Here is where I need you to understand the part that still surprises me even after all the practice, because there is a specific kind of anger that does not come out as shouting or crying, it comes out as focus. Like when you misplace your keys for the 10th time and you are suddenly done with chaos and you buy a hook for the wall and the problem is solved forever, and what hit me on that call was not grief but clarity. Because if the card is not a big deal, then it should not be a big deal for me to stop pretending it is harmless, and if the photo is simply a tradition, then I am allowed to create a tradition that does not require begging for a seat in a picture I am apparently not welcome in. I told her I understood, and that I hoped the pictures turned out great, and that I would see them when the cards went out, and the politeness in my voice tasted like a paper cut. But I kept it there because I've learned that the most effective thing I can do with people who thrive on telling a version of events is to stop feeding the version and start writing my own. And when I hung up, I sat with that ancient mix of humiliation and fury for a few minutes, then I opened my laptop and I started a list, not of grievances or speeches I would never deliver, but of facts, plain facts I could use, like how many people in this town still read the local paper every week, and how often they run those holiday supplements with pages of family greetings, and which page people flip to first. I thought about the award I got earlier this year, the national one for the program I built at work that my parents congratulated me on with a 3-line text and an exclamation point that felt like a sticker instead of a feeling. And I thought about the photo of me on that stage, not glamorous, not posed, just me doing something that mattered, and I realized that if my family is committed to showing the world a version of us that leaves me out, I am allowed to show the world a version of me. That is fully in, not to spite them, not even to argue, but to make sure the people who have known me since childhood get to see the thing my parents never seemed to send. Before you decide I am being dramatic, let me say something that may complicate your sympathy, and I am fine with that, because I promise the plain truth. There have been years I did not push to be included. There have been holidays I skipped because I could not bear the politics of who sits where and who gets praised for what, and there have been times I let a call go to voicemail because I did not have the energy for the script we always read to each other. And I am not standing here claiming to be the perfect daughter who is banished. I am saying I am a grown woman who has tried both being easygoing and being honest and has been rewarded for neither, and I am tired of playing a game I did not agree to. So here is what I did, and I will not pretend it did not feel good. I pulled up the contact page for the newspaper. I found the advertising desk number. I looked at the holiday section deadline, and I put the phone on speaker and waited while it rang. And when a woman picked up with that brisk tone that says she has a lot to do before closing time, I introduced myself and asked a very simple question in the calmest voice I have used in months, which was whether they were still selling full pages for the Christmas week issue and whether a congratulatory message with a photo would qualify as a personal holiday greeting or a standard ad. And when she said it would be no problem either way and the rate depended on placement, I smiled in a way that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with finally choosing the hook for my own story. After I hung up with my mom, I told myself to wait a day before doing anything because that is my rule when I am angry. Give it 24 hours, so I do not light a match I cannot unlight. But the truth is I did not need 24 hours because nothing about this felt like a heat-of-the-moment reaction. It felt like the overdue conclusion of a pattern I could recite in my sleep. So I made tea, opened my laptop, and started checking the deadlines and rates like I was booking a flight for work. Calm and methodical and absolutely done with pretending this was a misunderstanding that would resolve if I just softened my voice and made myself smaller. A cousin of mine, Megan, who has always been the unofficial translator in our family because she can be honest without getting kicked out of the room, texted me through screenshots from the family group chat I was quietly removed from a couple of years ago. And seeing the thread laid out like a clean timeline made something click in a way that even my anger could not, because there it was in plain words. The planning messages about the photographer at the church hall, the poll about dates, the reminders to bring matching colors, the little joke about not telling me because I would overthink it, followed by 3 laughing reactions. And if you are wondering whether it hurt more to see the laugh reactions or the casual efficiency of the planning, the answer is that it is a tie, and that tie is exactly what pushed me from hurt into action. When I called the advertising desk at the paper, the woman on the phone, her name was Carol, explained that the holiday section was almost full, but there were still 2 full pages open, one early in the section on the right-hand side and one near the back. And I could hear the part of her voice that wanted me to choose the easier sale and say yes to the back, but I have spent enough of my life taking the seat that is left and not the seat I actually want, so I said I would like the earlier page. And I would like it boxed in with a thin border so it looks intentional and not like a last-minute filler, and she laughed in a way that told me she understood exactly what I was doing even if she did not know the backstory. Then she quoted the price and the deadline and told me she would need the photo at a high resolution and the text in a simple format the design team could drop in. While I waited for her follow-up email, I did something that might sound petty, but that I am proud of because it was strategic rather than spiteful. I wrote a short press note about the award, nothing braggy, nothing flowery. Just the facts about what the program achieved and why the national organization recognized it, and I sent it to the city editor, a guy named Paul the first have met at a couple of civic events. And I asked if they ever run short community briefs in the front section the week of Christmas, because if they did I would be happy to provide a couple of quotes about what it meant to bring that recognition back to our town. He replied in under 10 minutes with a yes and a deadline and a word count. And the speed of it made me feel that specific kind of vindication that has nothing to do with ego and everything to do with finally being treated like a normal adult whose work is worth 3 inches of ink. I picked the photo carefully, not the posed headshot my mom says makes me look too career, and not a candid where I am laughing with friends, because this was not about proving I have a social life or a nicer blazer. This was about putting side by side two competing stories and letting the town decide which one made sense. So I chose the image from the moment on stage when I shook hands with the chair of the national organization and accepted the plaque. Not because the handshake matters, but because the context does. It is proof. And I asked the design team to run a simple headline that said my name and the award name, with a short holiday greeting beneath it that read, "Wishing our community a peaceful season and a new year full of better conversations," which is as close to a punch as I was willing to throw in print. The money part stung. I will not pretend it did not, because it was real money and I had to move a couple of things around in my budget to do it. And there was a moment where the old voice in my head asked whether I was buying a full-page ad to win a fight with people who will never admit they threw the first punch. But then Carol called back with placement confirmation and asked if I wanted a small teaser line on the front page banner that says, "Inside, local resident honored with national award," and the question answered itself, because what I was paying for was not revenge as pain, it was visibility as truth, the kind you cannot argue with at the next church coffee hour without sounding ridiculous. I sent the copy to Paul for the brief, the photo and greeting to the ad desk, and then I sat with the draft proofs they returned and did something I have never done in my life when it comes to my family, which is refuse to downplay it. Because my first impulse was to soften the greeting, take out the line about better conversations, make it more generic and therefore less pointed, but I left it in, and if that makes me petty to some distant aunt who has never asked what I actually do for a living, I can live with that, because I've tried the path where I accommodate everyone else's comfort, and it ends with me opening a card that pretends I do not exist. There is a part of this plan I have not said out loud yet, and it is the part that made me realize I was finally done asking for seats and ready to build the table, which is that I asked Carol to time the ad for the same delivery week my parents' card always hits mailboxes, and I asked Paul if the brief could run on the same day. Because if my family's Christmas tradition is about controlling the story of who we are in this town, my tradition this year is about releasing the story to the people who are smart enough to put two and two together without me spelling it out for them. Megan texted me later that night to say the photographer's gallery had gone live and that the family had chosen the widest shot because it fit everyone's faces and looked cheerful, and she asked if I was okay, and I told her I was better than okay. I was finally accurate, and she sent back a single line that said, "They have no idea what is coming," which made me laugh, not because I want to hurt anyone, but because accuracy has its own kind of bite, and this time they were going to feel it. Where it counts, in the story they thought they owned. And if you are waiting for me to say I had second thoughts, or that I called my mom to offer one more chance to fix it before the paper hit doorsteps, I did not. Because I have learned that offering extra chances to people who use them as delays is just a way of postponing your own dignity. So I signed the final proof, paid the invoice, and asked Carol one last question, which was whether she could confirm that the right-hand page I bought lands directly opposite the first spread of family greetings, and when she said yes, with a little amusement in her voice, I thanked her, closed my laptop, and let myself enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the next time this town opens its holiday paper, their eyes will land exactly where I want them to, and my phone will start ringing for reasons that finally make sense. Once the ad was locked and the brief was scheduled, I realized there were a few things I needed to do if I wanted this to land the way I imagined, not as a petty jab that people could dismiss with a shrug, but as a clean counterweight that would force anyone who saw it to reconsider the way they had been reading my family's little holiday story for years. So I made a list that was not glamorous and not exciting but necessary. The kind of list that separates a feeling from a plan, and at the top of it was permission for the photo, because even though it was me on that stage, the image belonged to the organization, and I was not about to give my parents the satisfaction of calling it sloppy or saying I broke a rule. So I emailed their communications director, explained I wanted to run the shot in my hometown paper as a holiday greeting that also acknowledged the award, and asked for written permission along with the photographer's credit line. And 20 minutes later I had a short warm note in my inbox saying, "Absolutely, congratulations again. Here is the credit. Thanks for representing us so well." The second thing was less about legality and more about narrative control, because I know my family's favorite move is to pretend a wound does not exist and then act shocked when it bleeds on the carpet. So I prepared for the inevitable deflection by building a small wall of context around the ad without making it look like a campaign, which meant I called two people who have always been fair with me even when they disagreed. My old English teacher, who now runs the literacy nonprofit, and the city librarian who sees every face in town at least once a month, and I told them a trimmed version of the story, not the raw one. Just that my parents had left me out of the Christmas card again, and that I decided to do my own greeting through the paper. And I asked them a simple favor, that if anyone asked them about it in the coming week they would tell the truth, which is that I have spent years doing good work without making a fuss, and that a page in a paper is not revenge so much as visibility, and both of them said of course, and I cannot describe how much that mattered, not because I need validators, but because I wanted my town to have its own chance to read this without the usual family spin fogging the glass. Then I did something I have avoided for a long time because it always leaves me feeling wrung out. I opened the photo albums on my phone and scrolled back through a decade of holidays. Not to torture myself, but to gather proof for the version of me that still wonders if I am overreacting, and I counted the dinners I did attend and the birthdays I did make and the messages I sent when I could not be there in person. And I kept a little tally in my head not to produce in a courtroom, but to remind myself that I am not a daughter who disappeared and then complained about being missing. I am a daughter who showed up and was cropped out, and there is a very specific relief in saying that internally without flinching. Like finally naming the medical thing that has been causing the symptoms and realizing you are not crazy or weak, you are just misdiagnosed. Because I knew my family would try to call me the morning the paper hit and recite their lines about embarrassment and propriety, I set up my own guardrails so I would not wobble, which looked like telling my boss the bare bones of what was about to happen in case my parents tried to loop my workplace into the drama, and asking the receptionist to route any unknown callers to voicemail for 2 days, and turning off social media tagging from anyone who is not already in my contact list, and none of that was about hiding. It was about making sure that when I spoke on my terms, not in a spiral with 5 people on a speakerphone telling me I am overreacting to a tradition that stopped including me before I even had a chance to say yes. Of course there was a moment of doubt, there always is, the part of the night when you are brushing your teeth and your brain tries a last-minute ambush by asking whether you are about to become the person the town whispers about at the grocery store. The person who made a scene at Christmas, and I let the thought land and I tested it against what I was actually doing, which was buying a page in a legal publication that exists to tell communities what is going on, and I said out loud to the mirror that I was not making a scene, I was making a statement, and the difference is that a scene begs for attention while a statement stands on its own and lets attention do what it wants. When the newspaper sent the final layout, I read it slowly, line by line, and approved it with the same steadiness I bring to contracts at work. And then I added one more element that I knew would make my parents grind their teeth, not because it was rude, but because it was disarming. I wrote a short note at the bottom that thanked the town for supporting the program we built and said I was grateful to be part of a community that believes in second chances and better conversations, and that little phrase about second chances was the only nod I allowed myself to our family dynamic because it is the absolute heart of it. I have given them second chances for years while they have refused to give me a first one. And I am done pretending that is symmetrical. Megan asked if I wanted her to leak the ad to one of my cousins so it would hit the group chat before publication, and I told her no, not because I was worried about spoiling the surprise, but because I wanted the ad to do what it was designed to do, which is arrive, land, and linger, and I wanted my parents to learn about it not through the filter of family commentary, but through the same channel they weaponize every year, the friendly pages of a paper that sits on every kitchen table in town for a week while people clip recipes and circle choir concerts and let their coffee go cold. On the last evening before the issue went to print, Carol called to confirm that everything was set and that the banner teaser would run above the fold, and she asked if I wanted a few extra copies held at the front desk for pickup. And I said yes, because there are people in my life who deserve to hold something solid after a decade of vagueness. My mentor from the program, my neighbor who watched me drag boxes into my first apartment, and Megan, who keeps receipts not to weaponize them but to remind me that memory can be accurate. And when I hung up the phone, I sat there in the quiet and realized I was not excited or nervous. I was settled, which is a new feeling for me around my family. And I decided to protect it by putting my phone on Do Not Disturb and going to bed early, only to wake up to a voicemail from my dad timestamped just before midnight. His voice careful in the way people sound when they know they might be recorded, asking me to call him in the morning because there were things we should clear up before a certain misunderstanding reached the wider community, and I listened to it twice and then pressed save, because the sweetest part of turning the tables is letting the other side feel the wobble for once. The morning the paper landed, I let the voicemail from my dad sit there like a blinking light on an old answering machine, because the part of me that would normally call back fast and smooth the edges had done enough overtime for one lifetime, and instead I made coffee, opened my email, and saw the subject lines I had been waiting for, the confirmation from Carol that the issue was on Porches by Sunrise and the brief from Paul already live on the paper's site, which meant the engine was running, whether anyone liked it or not. And the relief that rolled through me was not triumphant or giddy. It was the quiet kind that makes you realize you have been holding your breath for years without noticing, and you finally let it out because something true is happening in public and it does not need your apology to exist. I did one more thing before the day got noisy, a small move that would help the ad breathe in the places where my parents spend their time, because I know the routes of their Saturday mornings and I know which community tables carry more weight than a mailbox. So I called the library and asked the front desk if I could sponsor the week's community highlights display with a stack of the paper turned open to the holiday section, which they were happy to do because they are always glad to have someone show interest in anything that is not overdue fees. And then I walked 2 blocks to the coffee shop that still lets you put flyers on the corkboard, and I taped up a neat little sign that said, "Congratulations to local residents making us proud this year," with a clip holding the paper open under it. No arrows, no circles, no red ink, just an invitation for people to look with their own eyes. And that felt like a power I had been told I did not have, the power to curate reality without begging anyone to like it. By mid-morning the text started, not from the people I expected first, but from the quiet ones who usually only like things silently and never comment. A colleague from a few years back who said she was glad the town finally saw what we had built. A dad from the youth center who wrote that his son read the brief aloud at breakfast because the program had helped him get his first job. A woman I barely know from church who said she wished more holiday messages looked like mine and fewer looked like a postcard from a catalog, and each message was its own kind of medicine because none of them were arguing with anyone or playing referee. They were just present in the version of events where I exist. And that might sound basic if you have never had to prove you are part of your own family, but I can tell you it hits deep when you have. Megan, of course, had eyes on the family thread and could not resist sending me the highlights, and I read them like a person watching a play they have already seen. My mother's half-complaint that the paper was tacky to do this without warning the family. My brother's attempt to spin it as a miscommunication we could laugh about next week. My sister's fiancé chiming in with a sentence about keeping things classy that made me roll my eyes so hard I saw my own childhood. And then, buried 3 messages down, my Aunt Nancy asking in plain language why the card did not include me when the ad made her proud. And there it was, the crack in the wall that only takes one person without an agenda to open, because she did not say it loudly or with heat. She just asked the question everyone always pretends is impolite, and silence followed it in the way silence follows something inconvenient, but obviously true. The mail brought my parents' card around noon, and I looked at it like a detective checks the file even when she knows how the story ends. The smiling row, the caption about gratitude, the line about, "From our whole family to yours." That works as long as you do not ask who is missing, and I set it on the table next to the newspaper like a science experiment with 2 slides under glass, because that is what this has always been, not a war but a contest of definitions. Theirs about appearances and mine about accuracy, and nothing in me felt a need to post a photo or make a point, because the point was already making itself in living rooms all over town, and that is the thing about a clean plan. It does not need you to nudge it once it is in motion. Around early afternoon, my phone finally lit up with the call I had been expecting and ignoring all morning. My mother's name on the screen with that little ring of urgency you can hear even before you say hello. And I let it go to voicemail because I wanted her words fixed in a place where time could not bend them, and when I listened, she sounded controlled in the way she gets when she thinks someone is taking notes. She said she was disappointed I chose to do something so public without discussing it. She said family matters should be private. She said she hoped I understood how much grief this had caused at the church luncheon, and the punchline was that she wanted me to come over the next day so we could reconcile differences before more people got the wrong impression, and a laugh that was not kind escaped me because the wrong impression is exactly what I have been sitting inside for years, and I am done helping maintain it. Because I am not a monster and because I actually do care about my father, I called him back first, and he tried the reasonable route. He asked if we could call the paper together and request a correction, which told me how much he still does not understand about how truth works, and I told him there is no correction to run because nothing in that ad is false, and I did not yell or sling accusations. I just refused to participate in the magic trick where everyone knows the rabbit was there at the start and then pretends the empty hat proves otherwise, and when he ran out of lines he sighed and said he was worried about the family's reputation, and I said I was worried about my own and had been for a very long time. Then the calls flipped from family to community, and that is when the plan moved from satisfying to effective, because once people who have no stake in the drama start talking, the spin machine loses its fuel. A neighbor texted a photo of my ad with a heart and then added that she had my parents' card stuck to her fridge next to it and that the contrast was loud without you saying a word. The librarian emailed to tell me half a dozen patrons had stopped at the display and said nice things. The city editor forwarded 2 letters to the paper thanking them for featuring local achievements during the holidays, and through all of this I felt steady rather than triumphant, which is its own kind of high. Because I have learned the most potent revenge is not triumph, it is stability. Late in the afternoon, Megan sent one final message, a screenshot that made me sit still for a moment and let it register. My mother had sent a separate text to a smaller group saying that the ad had been misinterpreted and that I was struggling with some personal issues, which is a tidy way of saying, please disregard the evidence of your own eyes and accept my framing, and I realized then that there was one more move I could make that was not petty and not cruel, just clarifying, so I drafted a calm holiday email to the extended family list I am not usually included on. I wrote that I was grateful for the kind messages about the award, that the ad was simply a way of sharing good news and wishing everyone well, and that I hoped the new year would bring more honest conversations and fewer assumptions, and I pressed send without waiting for permission or bracing for impact, and as the whoosh left my outbox I watched my mother's number call again, and I let it ring and ring. Because the next words I was going to say to her needed to be uninterruptible and final, and I wanted them delivered at a time and place of my choosing rather than as a reaction to her latest performance, which is why I picked up the newspaper, tucked it under my arm, and headed for the one room where people have to listen when you ask to speak. And if you are wondering which room I mean, you will find out in a moment. I walked into the one room where people have to listen when you ask to speak, not because you have a title that scares them, but because that is what the room is for, a place where announcements are made and hands are raised and the floor is given. And I asked the pastor if I could have exactly 1 minute during community notes to thank the town for supporting the program and to mention something new we were starting with the small honorarium that came with the national award, and he said of course with that relieved look people get when they sense an approaching argument and realize you have come in peace, and when my turn came I did not clear my throat or search for a buttoned-up voice. I just said what was true in words that could not be misquoted without sounding ridiculous, that I was grateful for a community that notices work done quietly, that I had used the award honorarium to start a small annual fund called the Open Chair, and that it would cover travel or childcare or a simple meal for anyone in town who finds the holidays complicated and could use a hand making space for the person they actually want at their table, whether that is a friend, a neighbor, a partner, or the kid who aged out of the system and does not have a place to go, And I told them the applications would be handled by the library because librarians know how to protect privacy better than anybody. And that round of soft murmurs, that means people are picturing the person in their life who could use this, told me I had chosen the right room, because you cannot argue with a chair being open unless your issue is with the idea of other people belonging. I did not look for my parents, but I could feel the temperature shift in the way the room breathes when something lands, and the pastor said thank you and then asked the room to support the fund if they felt led, which gave the idea a spine that had nothing to do with me. And after the closing hymn, the librarian came over and said, "We can get the form up by this afternoon," and my old English teacher hugged me in the quick, businesslike way that communicates respect rather than pity. And 3 people I barely know slipped checks into my hand and said they had a nephew or a neighbor or a friend who might show up if the barrier was lowered, and in that soft, steady current I felt the last loose wire inside me stop sparking. Because the point had never been to make my family look small. The point was to stop letting them make my life smaller than it is. My mom called while I was still in the parking lot, and I let it go to voicemail because I wanted to hear the script before I responded, and it was exactly the performance I expected. That I had humiliated them by parading my private issues in a public place, that the name the open chair was an attack, that people were talking at the luncheon, and when she finally came up for air I called her back, and I did something I have never done in my life. I spoke one paragraph without allowing an interruption, and I made sure each sentence closed a door. I told her I did not humiliate anyone. I funded something that makes lonely tables less lonely. I said I will never again play along with a version of family that edits me out and then asks me to protect the edit. I said the ad stays, the fun stays. And the next time she says it is just a card, I will agree and remind her that a card can no longer control the story because enough people now know another one, and then I stopped talking and let the quiet sit there like a boundary you can see. She tried to pivot to reputation and grandchildren and what the pastor must think, and I told her reputation is what you get when your actions line up with your captions. That the kids will be fine because they saw their aunt do something concrete for people instead of arguing about optics, and that the pastor thanked me twice. And then she said the line that always used to make me fold. She said she wished we could keep this in the family. And I told her that is exactly where I kept it for years, and it turned into a locked room with no windows, and I am done living in there. My dad called later in the afternoon with a softer voice and asked what I needed from them to make this right, and that was the first honest question anyone in my family has asked me in a very long time. So I gave him an honest answer that did not require negotiation. I said I need 2 things, and they are simple. First, if you are going to keep sending a card that says "from our whole family to yours," then you need to invite your whole family when you take the photo. Which means telling me the date and the time early instead of after the fact. And second, if you choose not to include me, you're free adults who can make that choice. But you will not ask me to pretend it was an accident or a scheduling glitch. You will own it out loud without using my supposed sensitivity as a shield. And he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said he heard me, and for the first time in years I believed him. By evening, the library had the form live. The paper's website had 2 short comments from readers saying they were glad to see holiday pages include more than matching outfits. And my inbox had 6 messages from people who wanted to contribute to the open chair. One of them from a woman I barely remember from high school who wrote that she had not spoken to her mother in years and that a small gas card would make it possible to see her chosen family in the next county on Christmas Eve, and I sat with those lines and let myself feel the strange mix of satisfaction and sadness that comes when a clean decision heals something and acknowledges what it cannot fix, because yes, there is a part of me that would still like to be called and told the time of the photo. And there is a larger part of me that has finally built a life where I do not need the invitation to prove I belong. The next morning, the paper put a small follow-up in the community briefs about the fund. The librarian sent me a photo of the stack of applications in a plain folder behind the desk. And my Aunt Nancy left me a voicemail that began with the words I have waited to hear from an adult in my family since I was a teenager. She said, "I am sorry. I should have asked more questions sooner." And whether or not my mother ever says those words will no longer determine how steady I feel when I wake up. Because the center of gravity has moved out of their house and into my own hands, and that is not a metaphor, it is a fact I can describe with receipts and timestamps and a bank ledger. I do not know what next year's card will look like, and I am not going to pretend I do not care at all. I care the way you care about a game you watched for too long before realizing the rules were invented to make you lose. But I know that when people in this town opened their mail this year, they did not just see the polished picture where I was missing. They saw a page with my name and my work and a line about better conversations, and then they watched me take that attention and turn it into chairs for other people who have been edited out of someone else's caption. And that is the part that will outlast an argument at a kitchen table, because it lives in other kitchens now, quieter and kinder. And whether my parents choose to change is frankly not the headline anymore. So here is the last thing I will say on it, and then I am going to get on with my day, because peace is not a theory in my life anymore. It is a practice with a budget line. This year when they sent a card without me, I sent my own, and it was not a picture. It was a plan, and when the town read the story rearranged itself without anyone needing to shout, and if that breaks a few rules of politeness, I can live with that, because I did not set out to be polite. I set out to be accurate, and in the ways that count I won, and if there is still a little noise at the edges, let it buzz. The center is quiet and strong, and I finally like the sound.